Hey everyone, welcome to Ask the Experts for Azure Communication Services. My name is Sean Henry. I'm a program manager on the Azure Communication Services team. Let's get started. First of all, a couple things. Go ahead and start asking questions in the chat. Questions will get approved by our moderator and upvote good questions. If you see a question you like, go ahead and upvote it. That'll kind of surface it to us, and we'll get to the questions as soon as we can and as many as we can in the time we have with you. Couple quick reminders: this session will be recorded, and the chats should adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which you can search online, or I have briefly here. I'm sure all of you will be on your best behavior. So without further ado, I will introduce our three guests. I have here Bob, Anthony, and Marianne. Why don't you guys introduce yourself? Bob, how about you go first?
Sounds great. Thanks, Sean. So my name is Bob Sayre. I am the general manager of the newly launched Azure Communication Services. Nice to meet you all.
Anthony?
Hi, I'm Anthony Valentino. I'm the program manager and lead for Azure Communication Services.
And Marianne?
Hi, I'm Marianne Niskowski. I'm a program manager on Azure Communication Services.
So Bob and Marianne, we just saw a couple hours ago a replay of your breakout session where you guys walked through a lot of the new stuff that we're offering with Azure Communication Services and showed some really cool demos. How about we spend a minute or two just recapping that? Bob, why don't you start?
Sure. So we covered what we just launched, which is Azure Communication Services. And Azure Communication Services is a new offering, a new Azure service, which offers a set of APIs and SDKs. So it's a platform offering that has communication capabilities. And Azure Communication Services is built on the same cloud that powers Microsoft Teams, which is used by millions of users every day. So as a developer, you can use Azure Communication Services to embed any of the communication offerings inside of your application or workflow. Those offerings include things like PSTN calling, so traditional PSTN calling, SMS text messaging, voice and video calls over VoIP, and those can be either one-to-one or group calls, and group calls will support up to 350 users in a single session. And then we also support chat. And so chat messaging, we can support up to 250 users, and we can support things like emojis. You can plug into the server side, build automation, and I think that's about it.
Yeah, very cool. So we announced the public preview yesterday, today, depending on where you are in the world. So that's available, right now. We have been in kind of a private preview with a few customers for the last couple months. Anthony, how about you give us a rundown of what folks have been building with Azure Communication Services? Give us some examples.
Sure, thank you, Sean. So we're seeing a lot of exciting implementations as customers are embracing Azure Communication Services, both in terms of just the future of work and collaboration, but also really bringing customers closer to the actual participants on the call. So for example, within remote health, we see lots of needs to be able to connect patients to medical practitioners. We're also seeing it in financial advisory services or consulting services and so forth. Education is, a fairly obvious one in most recent times where we need to connect students to teachers and so forth, but not even just even in so much as just having educational classes, but even just after hours communication like office hours and things like that instead of any number of application providers. So as you can imagine, there is a laundry list of ways that we can really connect communications to and provide these experiences for our developer community to really provide ultimately a connected customer experience at the edge. In other words, getting you and your services closer to the customers that you won't want to connect with.
Yeah, that's great. I see a couple questions starting to come in. Folks, go ahead and keep those questions coming. The first one is about SDKs, but I'll just start with kind of a general question, maybe to you, Marianne. Like, where can folks go to get started?
So all of our SDKs, well, we have a nice table that has links to all of our SDKs on our GitHub page. So aka.ms/acs-SDKs. That's the link on the bottom on the PowerPoint will show at the end. You can also go to github.com/azure/communication. Our SDKs, we have 6 SDKs, and they go over the different communication modalities. So SMS, chat, calling, PSTN, and there's also some more housekeeping SDKs for authentication and creating the resource. The SDKs go over a variety of different languages, Python, JavaScript, there's some for iOS and Android, .NET. We will have a calling SDK for .NET that is coming later, so that'll be announced soon. Go to the GitHub to find, the full table of what SDKs we have available for which features.
Yeah, exactly. I think you saw the question there. Someone asked that they heard the .NET SDK is coming soon, and were wondering around if that was intentional and around the JavaScript SDK. So I just to kind of reiterate what you said, Marianne, you mentioned that the .NET SDK for a number of pieces like chat and phone numbers and SMS and so on, it is available, but the kind of client SDK for integration with voice and video, that's coming real soon, right? Within a few weeks, I think. Yeah, Marianne's nodding. For those of you just listening along on your commute, Marianne says yes. Cool. So I see some more questions coming in. How about Anthony? How about you take this one? Is there any integration with other third-party chat services like Omnichannel or LivePerson?
Great. That's a great question. So as a base set of primitives, you can imagine that you will be able to connect it and to any number of experiences that you would like to do. Now we are seeking both, as Microsoft, if you followed up with some of the other sessions earlier in Ignite, you'd see also that we had integrations with Dynamics Omnichannel, more specifically in enabling some of the telephony solutions. So the long story short is that as a base set of primitives, you could really kind of build what you want from the ground up, and that's what we're seeking to afford to our developer community.
Cool. Another kind of question, kind of on SDKs, but I'll shoot this one over to you, Anthony, too. Does ACS share any technology with the Skype for Business Web SDK?
That's a fair question. I think like just a broader question just to like re-baseline as far as ACS technologies. Azure Communication Services was built on the same effective platform that empowers Skype for Business, and Teams, more specifically Teams. As you can imagine, with the evolution of our Microsoft communication technologies, starting from effectively kind of earlier days with Lync and Skype Communicator and so on, but then ultimately moving to a cloud presence, or cloud-based communication platform more specifically, or expressed today as you see it as Teams. We have been able to build our technology platform entirely on the capabilities that you otherwise have within Teams today, which also brings to bear both the security, the reliability, and scalability that have come with Teams, and in most recent times that we've seen scale quite significantly in terms of the amount of users and traffic that otherwise is flowing to the Teams client.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know, Bob, you mentioned that a bunch in the session where you talked, and even earlier in our session here, you talked about using the power of Teams and the same infrastructure, and the updatability and the improvements and reliability and stuff that we get from building on top of the same infrastructure that Teams and other products that Microsoft use. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? I see a couple other questions about that as well.
Sure. So as Anthony mentioned, Azure Communication Services is built on the same infrastructure that powers Teams as well as Skype and Skype for Business. So the great thing about that is that you get all of the scalability. So we handle over 75 million daily active users on Teams. It's a global communication network. You can connect participants into calls or chat sessions from anywhere in the world. And as a developer, you don't have to think about any of the complexity that goes with that. You don't have to think about network routing. You don't have to think about, just network traversal. We'll take care of all that in the platform. But as a developer, when you build this solution, it differs from Teams in that number one, we have a bring your own identity concept in Azure Communication Services, where you're not a user that is a licensed Teams user, your users are not licensed Teams users, they're not in Active Directory. And so that gives you as the developer the flexibility to use your existing identity system. So if you have somebody who's logging in already to your website and you want to enable video chat or video calling or chat with a customer service agent, those users can log in the same way they do today, and then you can just enable those capabilities using our APIs and SDKs.
Yeah, I think that's like a great segue into our pricing model. Marianne, do you want to talk a little bit about how it works and how you get charged for Azure Communication Services? Someone has asked, Johannes has asked on the chat, how does the licensing model look like?
I'm here now. So as I was saying before, the licensing model is similar to other Azure services. So since Azure Communication Services is offered through Azure, you'll be billed based on consumption for all of your usage. So it's a pay-as-you-go model, and if you have a M365 license, that doesn't apply to Azure Communication Services. So it's just the pay-as-you-go through Azure billing.
Which is great that everything's all in one place. I know I can see it, cruising through my credits with all the VoIP calls and stuff I've been making, testing this thing out in the last little bit. Really great to see everything just integrated there and all the connections. Let me just check through some questions here. I'll get caught up. We'll play a little bit of elevator music while I read through here. Question actually related to billing as well, but maybe in the PSTN space. Anthony, do you want to take this one? Will outgoing PSTN calls use the Teams calling plan? And if so, will the minutes be pooled within the Teams pool? Nicholas is asking.
All right. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So just to kind of reiterate and separate the two, the Teams itself providing a client and services as well as the calling plan that you otherwise would get requires you to have an M365 license and identity. So E5, E3, and so on. With that, then you would otherwise have your calling plan that would be associated to that user. So I think there's a key differentiating point just to focus predominantly in on here, which is that, again, heavily user-centric, especially when you started getting into the cloud communications APIs, where a lot of that core functionality within the cloud communication APIs is otherwise is embedded within the graph, and that you get the richness that otherwise comes with the rest of the graph. So briefly on that tangent, you can imagine that you would then go and want to create or schedule meetings that might be user-based, or again, part of that core user entity. Segueing and moving over to Azure Communication Services, as Bob was highlighting, it's identity agnostic. So it's bring your own identity. You manage your own identity store and mechanisms and so on, create participants, users, and so on, and add them to the conversations as you see fit accordingly. So in that case, it is a separate, arguably I would say calling plan, but it's not really a calling plan, it's separate metering that is done then through Azure. So similarly, the voice and video VoIP was a cost per minute. You just have the same thing with PSTN, with the exception of leasing of the actual phone number itself. There's a monthly recurring charge for that. And then also, as Marianne was kind of alluding to with chat, cost per message and so forth. So all of those, the nice thing about that is that it's effectively pay as you go. It's a really simplified billing model. So you kind of pay for what you use, as opposed to then within Teams and M365, where again, it's user centric, still pay as you go necessarily, but you fill up and top up your wallet and then consume against that. So that's your consumption credits there. Kind of user-centric, and then on the flip side, within Azure Communication Services is building the platform that allows you to then build to your unique needs, expression, and then otherwise your users themselves that would be accessing, or in that case, maybe bots or applications and so on that would leverage the phone numbers.
Yeah, and I think we should mention, Anthony, too, a couple questions around PSTN and phone number calling. Being able to acquire phone numbers through the portal, that's coming real soon, right?
That's a great call out, Sean. Thank you for highlighting that. There are some really exciting features that that Azure Communication Services is now bringing to bear. One of which is phone number acquisition, as well as SMS capabilities. So both for the usage of PSTN and SMS. Now, out of the gates, you'll see 800 number support for SMS two-way, so you can have some fun sending and receiving messages. And then similarly, we have a US-centric PSTN numbers. Now, that being said, we do have plans to expand further into further geographies shortly thereafter, expanding into Canada, and then also adding and bolstering our SMS capabilities in the near future as well.
So it looks like that rollout's happening. I think we're thinking kind of later in October. We'll start seeing that show up in Azure. Next question, I'm going to head over to you. Go ahead, Anthony. Are you going to correct me on that?
No, that's the plan. Thanks, Sean.
Get cracking. Next one, over to you, Bob. Anonymous asks, will there be any native integration with WhatsApp into our functionality?
So this question is, the answer to this question is similar to the question that Anthony answered about will we integrate with third-party chat services like Omnichannel or Live Person. And so we don't have those capabilities currently pre-built, but anybody can build them. And so we have a set of APIs and SDKs where you can participate into conversations as a bot or as a server-side integration. And then using that integration, it would be really easy to connect essentially the conversation into a third-party service like WeChat. And by the way, the demo that we did in our breakout session includes a very similar example to that, where we connect an end user in a chat to a cognitive services bot. And so the way that we did that through basically having the bot connect onto the same thread is the same way that the integration could be done with WeChat.
Right, and I think you could potentially do the same thing with Bot Framework, which offers a lot of connectors into other chat services as well.
That's right, and those channels are already pre-built, right? So Bot Framework gives you the ability to open up or just connect into those channels.
Exactly. I think that's, that really touches on the power of having, communication services in Azure. It just allows it so easy for you to connect to all the other Azure services that are available, and you can kind of use Lego blocks to build your solution. Next one, I'm going to answer this one. I'm going to take one because this is one that I know. Will I be able to build an app that allows users to share a window and a desktop during a video session? The answer to that is yes. In fact, that functionality is already there. If you go and check out our samples, there's I think it's called the Calling Hero app, and it has shows off all the functionality for our video calling features, and in there, you can share your desktop just like you can if you use Teams or Skype or most other voice over IP applications today. You can certainly do that. And I'll kind of follow on to call out the GitHub as well. I saw a question here around call recording. That is something on our roadmap, but any kind of feature requests or things you're interested in us doing, please head over to our GitHub and file an issue or feature request, and that's where we'll be kind of triaging and building our product backlog. So that's like kind of a great place to continue the conversation and help us prioritize what you guys are looking for from Azure Communication Services. I see another question here around authenticated and anonymous users, and I'll send this one over to you, Bob. And you can talk a little. I think it'd be great to kind of talk a little bit about how the demo was built and how that integrated. One of the demos we showed during the sessions. The question is, does a user have to be authenticated before the services ACS are used, or can apps be used by anonymous users to do things like video conversations?
Yeah, so that's one of the advantages of Azure Communication Services is that Azure Communication Services is identity agnostic. And so, and it's a good call out to the demo. There's also some samples in GitHub. You can go and take a look at some of the ways that we create users in the system and then also issue access tokens against those users. So when we say identity agnostic or bring your own identity, what we mean by that is that we in Azure Communication Services, we only keep track of an ID, an internal ID that's based on MRI for users. So when you do your integration as a developer on your resource, you can create users, which effectively just creates an ID in Azure Communication Services, and then off of that you can go issue access tokens for your clients to be able to connect into the system and then join chats or VoIP calls, for example. And so the nice part about that is that you can authenticate the users on your end in your code. So Contoso, for example, authenticates users on their web front end, and then they basically just map the user in their system, which could be stored in their own Active Directory or some other identity provider like Google. They can just map those users to the ID that was created for the user in Azure Communication Services. So it's nice because it lets the developer, so Contoso as the example, decide whether users should be authenticated or just anonymous join.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of probably the biggest powerful feature with having these services available through Azure is kind of bringing your own identity, and what really kind of differentiates it from building stuff in Teams SDK or Graph SDK. And that kind of leads to the next question, maybe for you, Anthony. Teams Graph API does some of the similar functions. Would they be replaced by ACS sometime in the future? I think you're muted, Anthony. Anthony's saying Sean looks so good on camera. That's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So let's step back and look at what the Graph APIs really do. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they allow you the ability to deeply integrate a user-based, effectively, really predominantly experience. So that being said, if you go back and recurse through some of the Graph APIs beyond the cloud communication APIs, which I think might be referenced by Anonymous, who's asking the question, there are other teamwork APIs, which then tie you into the chat modalities, bringing forth like channels and chat messaging and so forth. When you start to look at the cloud communication APIs, those being like, I think that might be referenced like meetings and so forth, like create a meeting and such. A lot of that's done on behalf of a user in particular. Now, in those examples, again, a lot of the experience then is also within the Teams client or bridging two participants together, whether it be us right now and or potentially even an educator and maybe some students or someone that are joining potentially even anonymously. That being said, again, that experience is nested within the Teams client itself. Azure Communication Services provide the APIs that otherwise allow you to also connect participants in a communication modality. However, as Bob mentioned, they are identity agnostic. So we're not leveraging the M365 identities that are otherwise required for you to utilize Core Graph. Going back to the cloud communication APIs and what else you also get when you start to play within the Graph arena. As you can imagine, you may want to also schedule meetings or have scheduling that accesses then your calendar as a user. There's also a litany of other capabilities that are afforded within Graph that again really start to tailor down to enabling the future of the workplace or really have amazing workplace collaboration opportunities. So I would think of that more in context of what can you do for the actual users and so forth that are otherwise enabling functionality within the Microsoft experience, benefiting from the completeness that is M365. And then within Azure Communication Services, how are you otherwise then opening up your umbrella and extending the opportunities to really bring communication to your customers, say Contoso Health, maybe on their actual Contoso portal or something along that line, or remote Contoso Finance and within the Contoso financial advisory applications or something like that. Again, it's kind of like the rough split between both a cloud communication APIs and Azure Communication Services. Both have an express purpose. And both hopefully do it well, and we're definitely looking forward to seeing how you guys play with the Azure Communication Services and hopefully build some really cool stuff.
And I think, I mean, the big thing is that at the end of the day, it's all built on the same infrastructure. So you get the same performance and reliability, no matter which endpoint you use. And I think that's a huge advantage here. I see a couple other questions here. One around outbound calls, one around SMS. I can take those ones real quick. I know we talked about being able to acquire phone numbers from the portal being available soon in a few weeks. Same thing is true. That's what will enable SMS functionality is once you have a phone number through the portal. If you want to kind of preview that, I believe that SDK is actually available through, or maybe not, will be available through the Azure SDK once that becomes available. If you do want to take a look at what it looks like, there's a couple things I would suggest. One, in Marianne and Bob's session, they showed the Logic App connector, which is a really cool no-code way to connect to an Azure Communication Services and send SMSs based on events. You can send it based on, you can front up your own kind of REST endpoint, or you could have it based on, an email or a calendar invite in Outlook, or kind of anything. And then if you want to see, what the code looks like, there's a Microsoft Mechanics session that you can find on YouTube if you search for Microsoft Mechanics, or I believe it's getting broadcast live later today. And if you check that out with our fearless leader, Scott Van Vliet, has a quick demo that shows SMS functionality. So you can get a kind of a quick preview. The cool thing is there's not that much to it. It's one API, and you send an SMS, you give it a from and a to and a message, and off it goes. It's really really simple to send SMS messages. One question folks are reminding me that I might have missed is talking about Dynamics 365 and omnichannel integration. Do you want to take a kick at that one, Bob? Tell us about what's going on there. I know there were a couple announcements and some demos and some shout outs to Azure Communication Services during the keynote session yesterday.
Yeah, so Dynamics Omnichannel has support for things like chat and calling that are built on top of Azure Communication Services. So those capabilities will be available to any Dynamics customer out of the box. And like you said, Sean, I think it's probably worth going and checking out some of the Dynamics Ignite sessions and some of the demos there. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, as far as stuff to see, at Ignite, certainly there was some talk in the keynote. We have your session, Anthony and Marianne, as well as this Ask the Experts. I think there's another rebroadcast of your session in a few hours. I've heard a little bird told me that Scott Hanselman will be demoing some features in his session, which I think is coming up in just an hour or so. And then I mentioned that there's a Microsoft Mechanics session with Scott Van Vliet, our VP. I hear he's watching us now. So hi, Scott. Hope we're doing okay. And I think we're kind of getting towards the end of this Ask the Expert session. Of course, I would encourage everyone, if we didn't get to your question, please reach out to us. GitHub is probably the best place, or check out any of the feedback options that are available in our documentation as well. And we can get back to you and answer any questions. We're all kind of super excited about this getting into public preview. I'll finish it off. How about I go to each of you and ask what your favorite feature is in ACS, and kind of what the first app is you're going to use, or kind of what you're most excited about. I'm going to start with you, Marianne. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay, great. I think the favorite thing, or my favorite thing, the thing I'm most excited about is just how powerful this platform is. Since it is a platform, it really opens up so many opportunities for you to integrate with other Azure services and to build super customized solutions to help reach your users and your customers. And I think that's super exciting. If you do go back and watch our session, the digital breakout session, we had some cool demos that showcase this. And I think the one to call out there is the chatbot demo that Bob talked about earlier, but it uses EventGrid to hook up to the chatbot, which the knowledge base there was built out by Q&A Maker, and it's neat to see all these different services come together to build a really polished solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's really exciting. Anthony, how about you? What are you most excited about?
Thanks, Sean. I'm definitely most excited about the future of what developers are going to be able to enable with the Azure Communications Platform. As you can imagine, the base primitives are just the beginning expression of what developers can do, whether it be voice and video calling in an identity agnostic manner, enabling PSTN capabilities, whether it be inside of Dynamics, even, for example, just so you can dial in, or dial out rather, and eventually maybe even dial in. There's just a laundry list of things that can be exposed and made available now to developers. But what also begins to really excite me a lot now is the future of Teams interoperability. Is we're also going to be enabling the capabilities of bringing your endpoints and then having that interaction with Teams. Because then now you can imagine, as I mentioned, with both the combination of the Graph APIs and Azure Communication Services, I mean, it's just a giant toy chest for developers to go and play with and really build out some really compelling experiences for the future of workplace and ideally the connected customer experience at the edge. So I think there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff that we haven't even dreamed of yet. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys express it in your applications.
Bob, how about you?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's a combination of all the things that both Marianne and Anthony mentioned, but the cool thing about Azure Communication Services is that you get a lot of things that are basically done for you. And so as a developer, you can think about the creativity, you can think about your workflow, your use cases, and you can kind of take it from there. You don't have to worry about things like, how do I scale my system? How do I build in end-to-end quality? We've been doing that for years, and we built Azure Communication Services on top of the infrastructure that powers Teams. And so the great thing is we just get to use that infrastructure. It's global, it's reliable, it's scalable, it's high quality. And so then as a developer, you can just go and figure out how you want to integrate it or what other use cases you want to build on top of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'll share mine because I think it's kind of cute. I was talking with my 7-year-old daughter the other day, and she was wondering why I was so busy getting everything ready, and we ended up talking about apps, and she really wants to build an app because she thinks that's what I do all day. And I asked her what features she wanted, and number one on her list, she wanted an app that could chat with her friends. She wanted to call and video chat with her friends, and I thought that was like really interesting that today everyone is so connected, and voice and video communication is so important, and chat communication, being able to collaborate together is so important. And it's something that I think everyone wants to have in their app. It turns out, she wants to build an app to draw with her friends. She really likes drawing. But a core piece of that is adding communication to your application. And I think that really hits home to me, why this is so important and why it's so powerful, because you can add these modalities, these Azure communication functionality to any of your app quickly and easily. You don't have to worry about the details. We got that for you. Just paint it in. So I encourage everyone, we're going to wrap up here. I encourage everyone to go and take a look at our Azure page on azure.com, which I put up here on the slide, our documentation, as well as the other sessions we're doing at Ignite, and then go continue the conversation with us on our GitHub page. Thanks, everyone. We're signing off. Thanks, Marianne, Bob, and Anthony for joining me. And we'll see everyone later. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.